202. Yes. This is Child Development 202, 205 book walkthrough for chapter 7, ADHD, but I do kind of talk a little bit about autism and maybe the other pieces of this unit too, which is emotional disturbance and gifted. So it's a little fuzzy in here, but we're mostly walking through chapter 7. Good. Okay. So I like how our book starts off with Adam Levine. I mean, like, he's a dad now, you know, and in interviews, he said, I can't imagine how many songs that I had in my head and went by. And so the best thing that I have in the module or in the lecture is the BuzzFeed video of the BuzzFeed staff talking about what it's like to live with ADHD. And there's men and women, and they all have different presentations, and they talk about how meds helped me, how I didn't like the meds, how I stayed on the meds, how some of it is about things passing them by. But at the end, this one girl says, you know, my ADHD, you can't touch it or see it, but it's the most real thing about me. It's like, oh, it's heartbreaking, because imagine the most hyper you've ever been, maybe the most caffeinated you've ever been, or you are at like a carnival, or you are like Dave and Buster's, and there's like bing, bing, there's all this stuff, and you're just like having a great old time. But being like that all the time, oof, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. So again, ADHD has a place in this world because our world is very, very fast paced. Our very American life is very, very fast paced. But when you have creative people who tend to have some other ongoing issues, it's hard. So you'll see people who write stuff down. You'll see people who are ADHD. You'll get people who are great at being around people, sales, bartenders, like a teacher who's like hyper, like my son's math teacher, she has ADHD. In fact, she just recently got diagnosed. She has 4 teenagers. She's amazing. She's an amazing teacher. She also works with like NASA teacher prep. I mean, again, 4 teenagers, 2 jobs. And my son was the one who's saying, oh, I have those symptoms too. I wonder if you have ADHD. And she finally went back and told him, I asked my doctor and I took the test, and because you suggested. And so I thought that was really, really sweet. And so it doesn't change the person. I find people with ADHD have like that amount of energy that's lovely. It's great. But I also have heard from them, it's kind of irritating to have so much energy sometimes, especially as adults. You know, I do have a friend who has like a little book, and she writes down all these like crazy ideas, and they're fantastic. But she's like, if I don't write them down, they're bouncing around my head. I'm like, oh yeah, get those out of there. Okay, so there's some interesting definitions here too. And again, I mentioned earlier that boys and girls sometimes present differently, and we'll talk more about that as well. So the basics, and again, these are like, this is kind of like the outline of the chapter. You're going to get these basics of inattention, hyperactivity, and or impulsivity. I have a spot on my shirt. So, and or impulsivity. So definitely inattention of what? A lot of what? Teenagers do a lot of right? But again, we talked about receptive communication issues in speech. It could be this too. They could have receptive communication delays, but there also could be focused on something else, to where you're telling them something, they can't focus on what you're saying because they're looking at something else. Plus they could have a reception, like a little gap. Hyperactivity, a lot of energy. And then impulsivity. My example I gave earlier before the recording was, in my house, my son will walk by me and he'll like just kind of like elbow me, not hard, but just like, we call it swiping. And so I did it like Dora, and I say, swipe or no swiping, right? Or he'll come by and like flip my hair like this. It just crosses his mind, and he's going to do it. And so I have like things like in my kitchen where, you know, he's maybe putting dishes away and he has a knife in his hand, and like, kind of like, you know, plays with it on the wood countertop. I'm like, oh my God. Or he's just like, I'm like, you're 15. Do I have to watch you with all that stuff? So like, there's things where it just crosses their mind and they do it. Let's see. So here's again, because we're talking about IDEA, it has to be affecting their schoolwork. Now, I don't know about you and me, but I could tell you, I have a very short time limit of when I can focus hard and deep on stuff. So like if I'm creating a new document, a new assignment, I need to carve out a solid hour. Now, in that solid hour, I'm probably caffeinated to where I can really get in there. But if I'm not, I could be like listening to a podcast and I could be doing all this kind of stuff. The other night I was writing something I had a movie on while I was writing, and then I checked my phone. I was like, I am doing 3 things at once, and this is not okay. Which one of those things was being done well? None of them, right? But I had the insight to say, stop that, right? A lot of times the insight is not here, okay? So the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, they do have ADHD and ADD in there. It doesn't mean that it is a mental disorder. It just means that it's listed that it can be diagnosed on the medical side. So again, we're the school side, the doctors on the medical side. So we use a category and the doctors use a diagnosis. So again, you're going to see this inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. They can have more than one type, and there's technically 3 different types. And so we'll talk more about that. Now, again, in the discussion board, I put an executive dysfunction or an executive functioning example. And so it's that, like I call it, that secretary up in our head that helps us get things in order, plan ahead. Like I this semester, I'm doing 2 brand new classes. And so by Mondays, I have to have 2 brand new modules that I've never written before. So I'm telling you, I have to tell myself, I'd like to be able to get that all knocked out on Sundays. Can't do that. That's I think it's about 4 hours of work each. So I start the skeleton on Wednesday. Then I start outlining on Thursday. Then I had to learn that backwards, or else I was up till 2 in the morning on Sundays. And that's not helpful for anybody. But kids with executive functioning or dysfunctioning, they don't do that. I don't think, oh, backwards calendar, or it will take me, oh, they'll say, oh, it takes me 10 minutes. And it's like, how many times have you and I done that? And it takes an hour. Let's see. And then they don't collect a lot of data, but obviously around 10 or 11% of US children have ADHD. Now they're also finding that there is a genetic component. So I know my son's adopted, so there's not a genetic component to us. But when my friend took her son in, the doctor literally said to her and her husband, it's one of you two. One of you has it. And they both went like this, like, it's not me, it's you, right? And so, but then we'll talk about that other type, because his is the inattentive type, not the hyper type, right? But again, all people like this, I shut off my email because it's making that noise. People like this have a lot to give, and there's a lot of gifts that come out of this. There's a lot of functioning that can happen inside of this really disorganized functioning. Also in the module, I put the ADHD expert in there. She's got a YouTube channel. She's done, I think her name's Jessica, and she's done a TED Talk. She's adorable and super ADHD, but she can describe it, and it's really, really cool. Also, you'll see resources from understood.org. That was another one that came up out of this. It was like autism and ADHD. People were scared of it. People didn't know what it was. And you'll even hear stuff like, oh, that guy, he was an active shooter, he has autism. You're like, those 2 things are not correlated. So when you see things like understood.org, and I just heard a very first radio commercial on that. And so they're like, if you have questions, come check out understood.org. A lot of resources I put in there just so you guys can collect those things as you're moving forward. Also, don't hesitate to make like a YouTube folder. I do. I have a YouTube folder for everything. Not just to watch later, but I have like one for ukulele and karaoke and special needs and child development and that kind of stuff. Right. So do stuff so you don't have to come back to Canvas, because once the class is over, you don't have access to these resources. Make a folder, organize those in there so you have them, right? Plus, then you can share them with people, and I love that, right? Okay, so here's the definitions from, let me make this a little bit smaller. Again, IDEA is about the education part, and you're going to see this in every IDEA definition. Results in like deficits to the educational environment, something like that, right? So again, chronic or acute health problems, this is OHI. So for IDEA, they consider ADHD to be a chronic or acute health problem, like asthma, right? ADHD is chronic, can be really severe or can be light, but it's a lifelong thing. It doesn't just go away, right? You learn how to manage symptoms. You learn how to manage your disorganization. For me, I literally put on music for an hour and I go, well, with me and my little one, I go, let's do a 5-minute blitz. And we can get stuff like cleared out in like 5 minutes between the 2 of us. We can clean like a whole room, like without like mopping or anything, but like But if I tell myself I'm doing an hour and I'm going to do this room, it's pretty awesome. Like the things I can get done in a long, right? But again, for IDEA has to say adversely affects a child's performance, right? Because listen, if the kid can sit still at school and focus, that's amazing. But if they're at home and the parents say, he's too hyper at home and his room's a mess, that's not an educational issue. Now, if they're great at school and they go home and they lose their homework, that might be part of it. That might be part of it. Maybe there's a 504 there, right? Maybe there's some sort of like accommodation modification. It gets sent home electronically, anything like that could help. So NIH, National Institution of Health, calls it a neurobehavioral disorder. So the brain and behavior. Yeah, makes sense. And then there's different, it'll say like this: fidgeting, talking too much, leaving projects undone, have trouble paying attention. I love their definition. It's really cute. And here's the APA, the DSM partial definition. They have to show 6 or more of the following symptoms for more than 6 months. And so what attends, now we separate it. Now again, IDEA doesn't necessarily separate it. They just say ADHD. The DSM, which the medical side says there's an inattentive side and the hyperactive one. So hyperactive is the one where it's pretty common, you can see it. Inattentive is the one where you have a kid who's not making troubles, maybe kind of quiet, maybe normally developed with their peers and whatnot, but they're like checked out a little bit, like a space cadet, a little bit like they seem kind of bored, but they're not. Like there's something going on in there. In fact, one of my godsons, inattentive type, all the way, kind of a quiet kid, had his friends, was involved in band and drums and whatever. But he would be standing or with people and he would just be kind of like, you see his eyes moving. And so we would use a term like responding to internal stimuli. And I was like, Mitchell, what's going on in there? Like what's happening in there with your mind and your body? And he's like, oh, I'm watching Star Wars. In his brain, he's just like, I'm watching Star Wars. So he's not hyper, but he's inattentive, right? So he'd be sitting in class and they would be talking about stuff and he would be like off in la la land. Now, a lot of times you'll see that in girls and then they go, oh, well, she's just an airhead. No, it's just called inattentiveness. Sometimes in large ways, they'll call it dissociating. But again, if you're not paying attention and things go by you, how do you catch up? That's in that BuzzFeed video. You got to listen to it. It's really cute. And then again, so there's these 2 subtypes, but here in IDEA, we really don't separate it unless you say this kid is like the inattentive type and we got to keep them focused. That might be in your accommodations and modifications, right? You would say something like, this kid can only focus for 6 minutes. And you're like, okay, so then we have to do breaks. We have to separate this. We can only do 2 math problems in 6 minutes, whatever. Like you can get these little tricks of the trade, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'd be an IEP. So then again, we'll talk about this, like it was a prior to age 12. If something happened after the age of 12, it could be hormones, puberty, or a head injury, right? Some of these, it has to be present in 2 or more settings like school and home, right? These symptoms have to interfere with school or occupational functioning. Like if you are distracted all the time and you're late for work all the time and you get fired, that's a problem, right? So again, then they try to rule out what it could be. So it's not schizophrenia, it's not psychotic disorder, it's not another mental disorder. So let's say they had delusions of, seeing little aliens. Those are delusions. That's a type of schizophrenia. We wouldn't say, oh, they also have ADHD. No, they're paying attention to little aliens. So again, for us, we are mostly talking about this definition, and we don't always separate the inattentive with the hyper one, but when it comes to accommodations and modifications, we will. So here is the example of what those symptoms look like, right? So J this is greater than or equal to 6 symptoms. So it talks about this kid right here. But again, this child is easily distracted. It could be a girl, it could be a boy, makes careless errors, has trouble concentrating, very disorganized. You'll see a messy backpack, a messy desk. We all know kids like that at school. Usually has incomplete homework, avoids activities required prolonged effort. And so then I get, people saying, oh, he's lazy. I'm like, no, he's amazing for 3 minutes. And then we got to get him off track and then back on track. And then he's amazing for another 3 minutes. But again, it has to be 6 more months, has to be present before 12, 2 or more settings. It has to affect their performance and not caused by other disorders. So again, we'll see this kid has had this for 5 years. Parents and teachers say it. He's at school, during church, all this kind of stuff. People are like, oh my gosh, this kid is not paying attention. He's failing 2 subjects and he doesn't have any other behavior. So you might see somebody who has trauma. In fact, when we talk about like the ACEs score earlier in the class, kids who experience trauma or PTSD can actually look like they have ADHD. So there's a lot more digging deep from a doctor's point of view, not the schools. But if the doctor could say it's not ADHD, well, we have to also go back and look at what does it look like in the school, right? But if it's trauma and PTSD, can we still have a IEP on emotional disorders? Sure, absolutely. But again, this is where there's that overlap is very, very. So again, we talk about the inattention, the hyperactivity, impulsivity. Yeah, on the go is driven by motor. There's one of the videos in there that says Ferrari engine, bicycle brakes. Waiting their turn, that's a huge one. It took Peyton, I think, 1.5 years to be able to raise his hand in this school and not to call out. He learned earlier, you have to raise your hand. When somebody says, when the teacher says, do you know the answer? He raises his hand, socially appropriate, but he would raise it and blurt it. And the best part about this school, they'd be like, all the other kids are irritated. They're like, you're not following the rules. You're supposed to raise your hand and be quiet until you're called on. And there's like 6 of them saying it. And imagine that during Zoom, during COVID, during the transition. The Zoom meetings with kids with autism were so hilarious because the teacher would be trying to lecture, and like a lot of teachers were struggling, right? But then you'd have a kid, maybe my kid, who would break in and be like, he would unmute himself and be like, Sarah, you're not supposed to be laying down. And then another kid would come in and be like, Peyton, you're not supposed to be telling Sarah she's not supposed to be laying down. And then the teacher's going in and out of the lecture, kind of is like patching garbly. And then you hear somebody barking in the back. I mean, it was like comedy. I was like, cringe. It was so hard. And so it just, I mean, when you have a room full of kids who have social issues with autism and then impulsivity with ADHD and then a little bit of both, oh my God, so funny. So here's these definitions here. Again, a lot of times in the educational system, we combine these, but this is the medical side. So inattentive is kind of like the space cadet, the hyperactive, impulsive, and then there's the combined one. So my kid is predominantly hyperactive, but he does have some inattention stuff. So they can meet both criteria. And so this is why you would hear ADD in the past, attention deficit disorder. That would be like the impulsive attention deficit, right? And now they kind of separated attention deficit into paying attention and being busy in the body, or not paying attention. So they're both deficits, but the H is the hyperactivity. So once there is a hyperactivity, it's technically this is ADD and this is ADHD altogether. So those terms kind of go interchangeably. Let's not freak out about it. But for here, I usually just say ADHD because most of them, oh, there's practice questions. How cute. Most of them have the hyperactivity. So out of all the kids who have ADHD, very few have just the ADD, the inattentive part by themselves. It's usually combined before it's inattentive on its own. But again, if you could see a child that's just a space cadet all the time, that could be the inattentive side. And then we talk about executive functioning. This is their organization, their time management, their all those different things. Ooh, it's hard. It's hard. What I have to do is, like, if Peyton has to do extended reading time, I read it with him. He'll read one page, I'll read the other page, or we do it in voices, or we do it like, I'm going to read 3 paragraphs, you can read 3 paragraphs. Like we have to make it silly and fun and moving around a lot more to keep that attention going. Also, he had a history test today. And so he had to study, and then he like studied for like 3 minutes. I was like, dude, really? And then I said, well, why don't you test me on it? And so he thinks that he's like the boss now. Yeah, we studied for a good 35 minutes. And so I was like, all right, all right. And it's all on like the French Revolution and stuff. So, he might like it, he might not. If he likes it, he'll study, no problem. So of course he likes science and things like that, but math, writing, no. Produces sloppy, careless, or incomplete assignments. Yikes. Yes, mine is very much like that. Let's see. Look at this guy. He says, if I could take a magic pill to get rid of ADHD, I wouldn't. There's a lot of functioning that happens in the dysfunction. So it's not all bad. It's not all bad. But there are different chemical makeups of, so people with ADHD tend to like buzz through lactic acid differently. So they work out a lot of times. Working out calms their brain down. So I'm like, maybe I don't have it. Okay. So there's a lot of different things that goes like, so how many kids have it? It's about 11%, but there's this interesting thing that in our country, there's a bigger diagnosis in certain states. It's more common in certain states. Why would you think that? Why is ADHD more common in like these deep southern states? And then next, this Midwest. What's up with all these kids over here? There's no light numbers until we get out here. Why? What do you guys think?
I have no idea.
Why are there more kids with ADHD in like Alabama?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So let's play devil's advocate. What's going on in those states? What's going on in those states that are different than the rest of the states that make it look weird for, so like a parent and a teacher has noticed little Johnny or Jessica has trouble focusing. What's going on in those states that makes it harder to focus? Is there more social media? Not necessarily. Is there more flashing lights and disco balls? No, not necessarily. What else? What else is going in there? Especially in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, North, South Carolina, Kentucky. What's going on there?
With those states, like geography wise, like I don't know, like farms life, I guess. Like that's,
Yeah, so that's something to think about. I mean, there's a lot of urban communities here. However, there's a lot of rural communities here, right? So you're going to get the Appalachian Mountains here. You're going to get high levels of poverty. You're going to get a higher concentration of African Americans here. And so a lot of times when kids are not acting the way they should, they get overdiagnosed. Remember we talked about that in the cultural part. So sometimes there's a piece of like, well, you can't sit still and you're disrespectful, you must have ADHD. It's not necessarily true, right? But what's going on out here that there's less numbers out here? I mean, we have urban environments, we have poverty here. We don't have as big of a Black community, but we have a Hispanic community. So why is Nevada the lowest? I can only guess. What's going on in Nevada that's different than anywhere else in the country, or could be different anywhere else in the country?
I don't know.
I know it's weird. It's weird to think about it. I don't know population wise, but maybe Nevada has less children, right? So if there's less children, you would still get the same percentage, but maybe there's more things to do to keep kids, or maybe Nevada doesn't really care, or there's the Native American communities, but you would see that through Arizona and New Mexico and whatnot. Native American communities don't always, like when we talk about the cultural issues, they don't always say like ADHD is bad. They're just like, oh, they just got a like extra spirit in his stuff, like whatever. Maybe there's more. So maybe here out in California, maybe it's, think of the relative definition, right? Maybe out in California, we're all moving so fast that we all look like we have a little bit of it. And so it doesn't seem so bad, right? Or we have weather, nice weather. I mean, even today, it's like November. I'm still wearing sandals. It's just like crisp and it was blue sky. And I was like, there's more things to do outside to run around.
I guess that makes sense because with Nevada, like I feel like the only thing they have is heat. Like they don't have,
In Vegas.
yeah, like heat. That's it. No, like, well,
Yeah.
they could have earthquakes, but there's
Yeah.
no
And
like
then,
tornado and stuff like that.
yeah. And then same with like Arizona, even though that's kind of the next color down, like there's a lot of like retirees in Arizona, right? So maybe when you get a bunch of old people with a few young people, they all look ADHD because the old people are moving slower, right? So it's all kind of relative. Here's one last thing I want to plant the seed in. Where do they make the ADHD medications? Here. This is where Merck and Big Pharma is here. It's not out here. Big Pharma is not out west. So what they do is they have a lot of doctors who are supported by these pharmacy companies that, oh, let's teach you how to, we're going to give you a lunch and learn, and you're going to learn how to diagnose and look for these symptoms. And sometimes there's these like really shady kickbacks and things like that. So down in here is where they make the medicine.
So if they have more access to it, they just like give it to more people.
Yeah,
Kind
or
of,
it's
'cause
just
it's
more like
there.
maybe you might see like posters on the side of the freeway talking about medicine. Or here you're gonna like, my friend did her doctoral thesis on like liquor in certain areas. Like if you drive out from here to the 10 and you keep going, you're gonna see different posters for different liquors that you really can't get in Orange County, because they know in like more impoverished places are gonna drink malt liquor out there. Yeah, so you might have more, it might be more culturally normative for if you act up, you have ADHD. Like it's almost like us saying, oh, that girl's crazy. Well, no, just because she had a bad day, she's not crazy. Like Karen, she crazy. No, yeah, maybe she has some mental stuff, but maybe today it was just really about like she just had a bad day, right? But over here it might be more normative to say like, well, if you can't sit in your seat, you have ADHD and you need meds. And the teachers buy into it, the parents buy into it, the doctors are pushing it. Yeah, so isn't that interesting? You would think that if it's 10% across the board, why is it different in different states? And then if for the same thing of our logic, there's less kids in Alaska, so why isn't Alaska lighter? Interesting. We got some interesting things to think about. And now here, this is in the increase in just that category, okay? So 1987, 88, I was in high school. And I told you, we just had guys who talked fast and guys who were hyper and whatever, right? And look at here, from 1987, then we go to 1997. This is 10 years, kind of coming up. This is when you guys were getting born, some maybe later. Then to 07 right here, look at that. 20 years later, it's gone up by 500,000. And then look at 07 right here. 07, 2017 would be right here. What? It can't just be the kids. We're not having more kids, we're having less kids, but the percentage of students going into IEPs is going up. Is it because we expect more from kids, or is it because we're putting the works too hard on them, or is it because we're not allowing kids to be kids, or are the teachers stressed out and looking for compliance, for perfect little angels to sit in their seat and not talk? I mean, look at all these numbers going up. What? And still to this day, it's under OHI, doesn't have its own category. Makes no sense to me. Isn't that crazy? Oh, look at that. So so out of all of the IDEA categories, we have LD is the biggest. Speech and language is pretty good. OHI is pretty big. It's almost as big as speech and language. These two are very similar. And then the rest are all in one, 30%. This is about 32%. Is that right? No, 30, 40. Yeah, about 32%. And this is about 30%. And that's 39%. Wow. It's a lot. So OHI, even though it's got other things in there, the ADHD does take up the biggest piece of it. So yeah, I'm liking this book with practice questions. That's great. So again, challenges and their solutions are my favorite. And when we talk about like, yes, we've had some challenges, but let's look at the solutions here. So the general characteristics is inattention, whether they're hyper and inattentive or just checked out at inattentive. Then there's a hyperactivity, impulsivity. You might get that, again, that motor going all the time and the impulsivity. And it just is like, I have to tell you, in our house, like we have a dog and he just wants, I just want to love the puppy. And she's like, I'm out of here. Right. He just like, I need to squish her and love her and get kisses and stuff like that. She's like, I'm out. She doesn't hate him, but she's like, she sees him coming and she's like, what do you want now? Because she knows he's impulsive because she's so fluffy. She's so fluffy. Impaired executive functioning. Oh, I am telling you, it's at his school. Every classroom has a poster on executive functioning and planning and motor planning and thinking ahead and taking your turn and thinking of others and theory of mind, being able to see what you see or postulate on what you see. It's hard. It's hard. So the challenges here is like in the social emotional realm, having peer relationships, family relationships, and teacher interactions. Like I'm telling you, mine would rather hang out with adults all day long. And he likes kids, but it's funny because he likes to stick up for kids. He's like the champion of the underdog. So if another kid is getting in trouble, he will get in between the teacher and the other kid. And then he's like, well, the teacher's not allowed to yell at her or yell at him or get mad at him. I'm like, what? But wait a minute, he was kicking over his desk. So yeah, the teacher had to take control of the situation. He's like, no, she was talking too loud. So his autism and his ADHD worked together against him. And then he was like, but I thought that other peer would like it when I was sticking up for them. And the other peer was kind of in their own little world and didn't notice. And so it's challenging for him to have peer relationships, but he does have some really nice friends and things like that. But it's either very standoffish or very intense. It's really interesting. Academics, how do you focus? How can you do academics if you're not focused? Planning ahead. So even with him, he wants to save up for a car, or he wants to get this cool Lego thing or whatever. I'm like, okay, so if you save $5 a week, how many weeks is it going to take you? Can't do it. Can't do it. It's crazy. Money is very, very hard for him. He has money in his hand. I'm telling you, if he's got $1 in his pocket, he has got to spend it. And then you know what, he'll, even if I say like, no, hold on to that and we can spend it over the weekend, he will like give it to a homeless person. He's so like, I have it must go. It's like, so it's really sustained effort. Yeah, doing things for more than 5 or 6 minutes, very challenging. Behavior can be edgy, it could be hyper, it can be super happy, it can be a lot. A lot of times I have to say like, buddy, in my office at home, I lock the door with a coded lock because I'm like, I need to focus. Go out there and do your thing. You know, there's another parent in the house, right? Go do that. Go play this. Go, work on guitar. Go do whatever. And he's still knocking on my door. I'm like, dude, I need privacy. So behavior sometimes is boundaries. Same thing with that executive functioning has to do with boundaries too. And the coexisting disabilities. You could have speech stuff with ADHD. You could have emotional stuff with ADHD. You could have ADHD kids who are gifted. You could have ADHD kids in a wheelchair. You could have ADHD kids who are deaf or blind. You could have ADHD kids with asthma. So there's a lot of other things. So like, think about it. If you have asthma, but you keep forgetting your inhaler, you might end up in the hospital. Right? So maybe you have to have a inhaler in your backpack, a inhaler in your pocket, inhaler at home, inhaler at school, like all these different things. So that's the executive functioning to help with those other coexisting disabilities. It's wild. There's a lot going on there. Behavior therapy helps. Again, there's TikToks, there's YouTube videos, there's TED Talks, there's all kinds of different things. We do take a stimulant medication. He does take Ritalin. 10 milligrams in the morning. He used to take it twice a day. Now he only needs it once, like a cup of coffee. Quite frankly, I need my cup of coffee, but let's see what else he's been on. He's been on Concerta. He was on methylphenidate for a few years. He did Adderall. Adderall is very similar to Ritalin. And what it does, people say like the stimulants help calm the brain down because their brain is opposite. Not exactly. So I think I've used this analogy before where in an ADHD brain, there's like a baseball game, like a catcher and a pitcher. So in their brain, there's one catcher, like in a regular game, but there's about 500 pitchers. They're like these messages, right? And what the stimulant drug does is get the one guy with the real ball to get beefy enough to get that one message across. I need to sit here and finish this fraction, or I need to invert this fraction because I'm dividing. Those kinds of things. So there's still a lot of stimulation happening, but there's one step up to the plate, literally. And so a lot of different these things are, so he was on Concerta for a long time and he didn't want to eat. So now he's off of that and now he eats. And so it's interesting because dexedrine was a diet drug for a long time. Yeah, so things like that. So you have these different things where he was like underweight for a long time, but what I would do then is just give him protein powder and all kinds of stuff like that. And so it's really kind of interesting because yeah, like you'll see this comment here, like it's not ADHD, he's just out of control. And I'm like, trust me, when he got his diagnosis for ADHD and we got a second opinion to be sure, the psychologist guy, I mean, but mind you, this guy was like bow tie, tweed jacket with the little arm patches, right? He's like, how do you function like this? He is like the most profound, highest, most ADHD kid I've ever met. I was like, really? How many kids have you met? Because he seems like a little wild monkey, but he's 4. I'm like, how are they supposed to be? Quiet and compliant? That's just not my world. And still to this very day, I see like typically developed children and I'm like fascinated. Like, oh my gosh, they're like a little angel. Like, wow, wow, you must have a clean house. Like, it's hilarious, right? So some of the solutions are, remember we talked about universal design for learning. We make sure that everybody has the same rules on the playing field. We make sure that everybody knows expectations. Everybody has to sit down and be quiet. Everybody has to raise their hand and wait to be called on. And if it's hard to be quiet, then in this particular school, we moved locations so he could have a resource room. Like yesterday, he was complaining about being dizzy and stuff like that. He's like, I'll do my work in the resource room. So he knows that it's a room right next to the classroom with a glass so they can participate, but not like disrupt the room, right? Differentiate instructions. Sometimes you just need that to concentrate, go into the resource room. Accommodations too. It could be like quiet. It could be this child can do this test in 3 different passes. We'll do first 10 questions, second 10 questions. So different accommodations that can happen and modifications. Assistive technology, maybe sometimes they need noise canceling headphones. Behavior therapy, he's got therapy at school, he's got therapy at home, he's got therapy private pay, and we had therapy at Kaiser. Self-regulation strategies, it's more than just deep breathing, but for him, it's been very helpful to use words, right? Name it to tame it, zones of regulation, or he'll be like, I need to go smash something. We've got a punching bag, we've got a trampoline, we've got all kinds of stuff, and then medication helps. Now, write this down in your notes. Pills don't teach skills. Pills don't teach skills. Pills don't teach skills. So you can give a medication, but that doesn't solve these problems. It just lessens them. So I tell people, even though now he's on 4 different medications, it really only shaves down the symptoms by about 30%. So whatever I'm describing, it's medicated. It's less. I haven't, well, like I say, once a week, he forgets his meds, which I don't think that's a big deal. Excuse me, but once a week, you won't see a real big change because all his meds, they kind of build up in his system, except the Adderall kind of goes away every day. But if he forgot his meds like in the morning and in the afternoon, the next day he would be like so disorganized. You'd see a lot more stimming. You'd see a lot more emotional dysregulation. We haven't done that in years. I used to not medicate him on the weekends, and that wasn't helpful either. Had other friends who were teachers who are like, you're not helping yourself. You're just driving yourself crazy. I was like, that's true. And so keeping the medications very consistent is very, very important. So again, so we talk about accommodations here. It says this is inattentive and impulsivity. Yes, these both say the exact same thing. They need accommodations and modifications. Yes, we know. Right? So it could be reduced noise or distraction-free environment. It could be a checklist. It could be an extra set of books at home. It could be brief assignments. So in his school, they're pretty good about not doing a lot of homework. And then on his IEP, we do very little because we've come to the agreement that if homework causes arguments, which could with a lot of kids, but for him, it might be arguing because, for 100 different reasons, he doesn't like the teacher, he doesn't like the content, he doesn't like the book, he forgot his book, he doesn't want to do it, he'd rather do, there's 1,000 different reasons. We realized that homework, it was causing more problems. So he has very, very little homework. It's like typing 2 sentences. They all use Google Classroom, which is awesome. And so it's typing something in or watching an ed puzzle, or it's something very, very short. If it's longer, then honestly, I actually bring him here to campus and we sit in my classroom and we do geometry together. It's really kind of interesting because in an educational environment, he kind of knows to play the game a little bit. But if it's at home, we're doing geometry, he's like, I want something to eat. I want to play the dog. I want to play with the dog. I'm going to go, the neighbors are walking the dog out there. I need to go say hi. Like, so if I reduce the environment or make it more collegiate, then sometimes that helps too. But that's him. And that's not always for every kid. But and there's another things like physical movement. We have to a lot of times when kids act up, teachers will take away recess or lunch recess. I'm like, no, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Let this kid run it out. Go run it out. Go be hyper. Go scream. Go jump around. Go roll in the grass. They have got to get it out of their body. Especially kids with ADHD, again, have that lactic acid production and they efficiently produce that. It's like lactic acid is like if you and I are running and jogging and our legs start hurting, that's lactic acid. But kids with ADHD can modulate that through the body really, really quickly. So it almost goes to prove that they need more physical activity. Frequent breaks help. So every 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe 12. Again, usually 1 minute per age of life. So that's why, that's why TED Talks are only 12, 15 minutes tops, because that is the top of our attention span, even as typically developed adults. So a 4-year-old can really only do 4 minutes on a preferred activity. A 14-year-old can only really do 12 to 14 minutes on a preferred activity. On a non-preferred activity, cut it in half. Yeah, right. And then teacher with proximity. Sometimes you just need to know that there's an adult there who can help you. Give a child a yes instead of giving the child the no. I learned that one a long time ago. I even said it to Peyton. I say it's not a no, it's a yes when. So sometimes even when he's asking for help, I go, yeah, I can come help you when, right? And I give him something to do first. So also that kind of maintains equanimity in terms of like, I'm not doing things for you and you're not pretending that you're helpless. So like, for an example, the other night he made like fried rice or something like that. Mom, I need help. I said, oh yeah, I can help you, but I needed to see you to put X, Y, and Z away first so I can come help you. It was just like he was making a mess. And so I just try to like lower the variables in the playing field. And then as I was helping him make it, could get him in other directions. Okay, get out the cutting board and the knife and chop up those onions. And so again, having proximity there and doing a yes when situation gets them more positive instead of saying, oh, this teacher's going to say no, this parent's going to say no, right? He'll say like, oh, can we go to the dog park? I'll like look at his room. I'm going to say yes when what? And he goes, when my room's clean. Very good. So isn't that how life works? Isn't that how life works? When do you get your paycheck? Am I getting paid this week? Yes, when the week's over, right? Okay, so here's some accommodations. An organizer. Every kid at that school gets like a big trapper keeper kind of zipper pouch at the beginning of the year. It's beautiful. He ripped his within a week. It was beautiful. Verbal or visual cues. He gets he has an actual page that shows you all the prompts that he gets every week, every day actually. Prompts, visual, gestural, or something like, it could be sit down, or it could be like, what do we do now? Right, because sit down is very directive. What do we do now is like a little passive aggressive, but it's not giving them the answer. And they go, oh, it's time to sit down. Or sometimes you just go like that and they go, oh, okay, it's time to sit down. So the goal is to get them less prompt dependent. If you have to tell a student you have to sit down now all the time, they're going to wait for you to tell them. But if you go, what do we do at this time? What is it time for? What normally happens at this time of class? Oh, okay, I put my book away. So you're helping them, you're scaffolding them, you're training wheels, you're external hard driving them until they can do it independently, right? So again, prompts is kind of like a type of therapy or support. Repeating instructions, I'm telling you right now, I tend to repeat instructions 3 times for everybody, because when things are new and funky and people haven't heard it the first time, like our brains, if we're distracted or are stressed, we're not learning material the very first time. So I will repeat it. Like even I said at the beginning of the class, I do not take off points for late work. I do not take off points for late work. I do not take off points for late work. It takes to the third time people go, oh, wow, that's interesting, except for discussion boards. So that kind of situation. So I repeat instructions or sometimes do it in a different way. Record instructions, sometimes how to YouTube video, or having like a little laminated card with a checklist, or first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, like something, anything that works for that child. Again, you can change settings. Study carols, I don't know what that means. Maybe like little work, like study buddies or study sections, like study guides, maybe. Preferential seating, checklists, small groups, sometimes working with friends. You know, you've heard that, like if you're listening to material, you learn like 10% of it. If you're engaged in it, you learn 40% of it. But if you teach it to somebody else, you've mastered it about 80%. So sometimes working in a group helps, because then again, they feel like they're on top of the world and they're bossing their friends a little bit, and then their other friend can take the boss of a different part of the chapter or the book or whatever. Extra set of books, sensory tools, fidgets are helpful. Like these little poppet things. I have these little poppet things. I don't know if you see it. It's like a little thing, and they have these poppets. They can have fidgets at school as long as they don't launch them. So it could be something like, it could be a small stuffy as long as it's not interrupting the class. There's like a little, you can put it on the side and say, when you're done with these 3 math questions, you can play with this guy, whatever, blah, 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 or you can have this, right? So sometimes it's squishy, sometimes it's, you know, whatever's not disrupting the class. Note takers and graphic organizers, they do things like seeker paragraphs where you have to do like support and this and that reasons and the whatever kind of situation. So it helps break down the creation of a paragraph very in a very predictable manner. Scheduling or timing. Do they need more time? Do they need to take breaks? Do they need to test multiple times? More frequent study periods, right? Instead of doing one class for an hour, can we do that one class in 30 minutes and then take a break and then, you know, do it during homework support or after school tutor for 30 minutes, right? Brief assignments broken into parts. I've learned here some of our assignments, when we break them down, then they're easier that way. And so I've learned that, and not so much in this class, but like in the intro classes, I'll do like one assignment, but I break it down into a bunch of different parts. That just helps everybody. So it's not all crammed in at the end, right? All right, so here's some common problem areas. Starting work. This is huge for the disorganized, the executive function. Just getting started. I even heard that from a different class this week. Just getting started. Just sit down and do it. Just getting started, right? There's a thing where our brain gets overwhelmed, but just going through the motions helps. Like I mentioned to you, like I separate when I write new modules, I go, okay, Wednesday, I'm going to duplicate the old model, erase stuff, create the skeleton with the new numbers and the new due dates. And then on the next day, I put a couple of more like content in, and then the next day I do the outline, whatever. I do kind of different things like that. If I can get 30 minutes, like 3 or 4 days in a row, that's better than 4 hours on a Sunday. It's not going to happen. Completing assignments. Peyton has these nice little, let's see if I can find it. If these they give us this, what he does. Let's see if I can do it this way. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to show you my Gmail and see what it looks like here. Ooh, it's not showing me Gmail today. Oh, I think I'm not logged in. When he signs in for me, let's see, it'll do it. Yeah, here we go. Sometimes because he has his Gmail and I have my Gmail and we go back over it. Look at this. Okay, so here is his there, daily report. You get a new one every single day, and this is what I answered him. So this is what he normally goes. He normally has this homework sheet. It looks really cool. It's each class, and it just says complete or incomplete and then signature, right? And so I told him he was testing me for his test and geometry. He's like, not due till Friday, I don't have to do it. And I was like, well, now you're waiting it all till Thursday night when I'm not home. So good luck with that. AR reading, that's just like, you know, separate reading, and He had to answer this part in Google Classroom. He had to watch an ed puzzle on whales. And so then he was, Mom, did you know this about whales? Oh yeah, sure did. And then back here, here's the homework sheet. Oh no, that's not it. This one, the daily report. Now this, because it wasn't filled in because he wasn't really there, but you can get an idea of what they're going for verbal, gestural, and indirect prompts. Mr. Phillips, the aide, here's the date. So world history, this is the time, the teacher, he has his one-on-one. This is what they did. They did CNN 10, they reviewed games. He spent the majority of the period in the nurse's office not feeling well. So normally he would say prompts here, 1 of those, 2 of those, 10 of those, whatever, right? And then points earned here, this is kind of their conduct. They do a 0, 1, 2, 3, and 2 is the expected. So the day before was all 2s. And this is his aide does this. So if you guys are interested in doing this work, this is what this guy does. Adamant about not attending class and became increasingly argumentative and encouraged to put forth any effort. Sat in the front of the school for the duration of the period. So I think part of it is that I said, you need to finish half of your geometry, and he didn't. Incessantly bug Mr. Phil about updates from the nurse and his parents about giving concrete answer to the startup. Yeah. So he'll be like, when are my parents coming to pick me up? I'm like, if you don't have a fever and you're not puking, why am I picking you up? So he puked. I was like, great. Look at this classwork. He did this here thing, whatever. And by the time I said, hey, I can come get him, his aide said, oh yeah, he was very charming. And then right when you pulled up, he was all, so something's going on. And then I did get him to admit that he ate extra Halloween candy. So yeah, I'll get this every single day. Yeah. And so these also kind of is calling out verbal protests and following instructions. These are kind of aligned with his IEP goals. Yeah, it's really, really cool. So we get this every day. Now, every kid doesn't always get this. I have a lot going on with my kid to have those things. But again, all these different pieces could work for a child based on what that child needs. Reminders, a predictable schedule. Again, he's in a smaller school, less kids. They're not allowed to have cell phones. If they walk in with a cell phone, they just have to put it at the secretary's desk. They get it at the end of the day. Again, there's way more boys than girls. I think there's 15 girls in the whole school. So there's no dating. So there's a lot of other distractions that in a typical high school aren't present. But again, to get him from the gen ed classroom to the special ed classroom to a different school took years. That was a big transition there. So early intervention is huge. I had friends with kids with autism, and they had intervention at 3. We didn't get intervention until 8 or 9. And so I'm not saying that it was bad, but it is, I couldn't imagine the world without it. So behavior modification, there's a lot of like, so how's that working for you? Or what should we do better instead? So things like a structured home environment, that's very hard with a kid bouncing around. Positive reinforcement, we don't do a lot of punishment. Obviously, no physical punishment. I mean, I do yell if I get super frustrated. But what sometimes, and he's giving, like, we were like loading the dishwasher together, and he like smacked me with a spoon. And I was like, excuse me, go get me your switch. I'm going to hold on to that until the end of the night. He's like, I didn't smack you with a spoon. I tapped you with a utensil. Hi, thank you, teenager. And so I'm like, and I don't hide it. I just put it up there. I'm like, when it said yes, when you may have it back, when your attitude changes, when you apologize, when you don't minimize what you did, blah, blah, blah. Tell me that it's not okay to hit a parent, blah, blah, blah. So, and it's very consistent, at least with me. If I'm not there, I don't exactly know, but most of the time it's about the same. Intervene appropriately when a problem is present. Yeah, you can't let things go because kids, they think they'll get away with it. So I'll just give him, sometimes it's the look, and he'll stop what he's doing, but it's hard. It's really hard, but you just got to be as consistent as possible, because the second you're not consistent, they'll say, remember 6 months ago when you let me get away with it? Oh yeah, they'll tell you. And then always communicate effectively with school medical professionals. We're texting back and forth. We have those emails. It's every single day. Yeah. But behavior therapy takes a while. Yeah, not gonna lie. But again, if you're just getting psych services, this is just psych services, and this is medicine and psych services. This right here is medicine only. And then this is both medicine and psych services. So again, this is the biggest section. And then this is kids who aren't getting psych services or medication. This is kind of where we're at right now. We're actually the orange ones. It's wild. Again, pills don't teach skills, but you have to get them to learn, even if it's like by memorization, how to act and behave properly. And I don't mean like rigid properly. I mean like not so far out of the norm that you're going to get arrested and end up in jail for doing something dumb. So again, school years can be a little challenging for kids. And we always start with the 504 plan. Sometimes that's all I need, but here's this cool little flow chart. We could do a pre-referral, right? We could do some accommodations in the classroom before pre-referral. And then like, does he need an IEP? Let's evaluate him. Is it affecting their performance? Yes, they can, they can be on so here's the thing, they can be on an IEP, but if it doesn't really affect their educational performance, then we can do a 504 and like just do a little bit more data review, how they behave like in a quiet room versus a crowded room. But if there's a eligibility that it limits their life, yeah, 504. And then if no, then they don't really qualify, right? It could just be somebody who's irritated and mad and they just don't want to be at school. That's not a disorder. And yes, it could be affecting their life, but if it's not something like PTSD, how do we handle that? So we'll talk about that more in, I think, chapter 10. So full alternative text. So again, some kids, they can't just sit and read, but they can listen, right? So maybe they need an audiobook. Maybe they just need pictures in a book instead of all the words, right? Oh, watches with vibrating alarms. For me, I have alarms all over the place. Mine's like, the bus is coming in 5, be in the shower by this time, like get packed up and ready to go before he comes home at this time. Like I have to do it, right? Medication, we have medications in a little organizer. We also remind each other, did you take your meds? Did you take your meds? Right? Learning strategies like graphic organizers, having study skills, flashcards, Quizlet helps, anything like that. That's like that. It's more something that they like, something that they respond to, something that they're willing to do every day, even if it's for 5 minutes. Self-monitoring. Sometimes we now, and when he turns 16, he's going to start doing self-monitoring. I called out this many times. I was able to sit still for this many minutes. So we're starting to get it into a little bit more adult section, and we're going to see how that goes next year. Really excited. He's starting to transition into adulthood. Goal setting. What kind of goals do they want? I told him the other day, I said, my goal for the day is getting my laundry all put away. Did I do it? No. Did I do 2 loads of laundry? Sure. Got towards that goal, right? That goal is going to, instead of happening that day, it was going to happen like a week from that day. And self-reinforcement. I don't know about you, but I do the thing where like, I'm going to do the hard thing first. And at the end of the day, yeah, or like at, 4 o'clock, I'm going to get myself a Starbucks. I haven't had that. And I worked really hard today. So sometimes, we have to do these things for ourselves, but little kids can't really do that. So as adults, parents and teachers, we can help them. So it could be something like this on there for each class period. Was I on task? Did I get my homework done? So my son now is really excited about his grades. I also told him I give him at the end of the week, instead of a report card, at the end of the week, I give him $1 for an A and 50 cents for a B. It's a very behaviorist approach to grades. But right now, and then I said, if there's 1 C on there, I don't pay at all. So right now he's got 1 C in history. He's got to bring that up. Then he can start going back to the A's and B's. Now, again, I'm not super in love with A's and B's, but he is. I would say A, B, and C, but he's in a mentoring program that says C's are not good. And I was like, okay. And so there's a lot of different things that we get to put into place. But a lot of times you have the child lead you and tell you what they're willing to do. Because your rules on what they're willing to do is not necessarily what they're willing to do. It's funky. So you have to work very, very closely with the parents, the teachers, and the child. So again, transitioning from high school to college, here at SCC, we have an adults with disabilities program. So yesterday, when I walked up to campus, there's a guy maybe around 22 years old, kind of like walking around mumbling to himself, like repeating the same thing. And that's called a COIC or echolalia. And we'll learn that a little bit more in ADHD and ADSD. And I was like, so my radar went up. I was like, oh, that guy's definitely on the spectrum. And then I come around the corner and then there was like the rest of the class going on a break. And I was like, all right. Now, thankfully with Peyton School, there's like an after the high school, they call them super seniors. They do like work related activities. They do like, they learn sewing, they learn woodworking, they learn how to handle money, how to do sales, blah, blah, blah. So again, there's different programs for different kids, and you can even have Goodwill services. It kind of depends on what their goals are. Mine wants to go to college, but he also wants to work at Disneyland. So when he says college, he says UC Santa Cruz. I'm like, okay, you're going to community college first, then you can transfer. And then, by the way, all you need is a manufacturing tech degree to work behind the scenes at Disneyland. So that's at Santa Ana College. That's 2 years. So let's figure that one out, right? So again, here, high school students with ADHD report significantly, or yeah, there's a lot of self-medicating with ADHD. Now think about it. Culturally, I've given my child medicine since he was 7. They just had Red Ribbon Week last week, like say no to drugs. I'm like, except for the ones the doctor gives you. Right. And so, but there's gonna be a time where he's gonna be like, I don't want to take those meds anymore. I'd rather have a beer or whatever's out there. Like, I don't, it's scary to me, right? Lower academic engagement, less time studying. That's why putting him in a different school helps. Emotional difficulties are hard. I can't imagine what it's like to be an emotional boy. He's very emotional. More time partying or video games. Yeah. It's like they need input. ADHD needs a lot of input, and school doesn't really give it. Plus they don't like school. So they want a video game. They want all kinds of different stuff. And then again, for college, they're less likely to enroll, less likely to attend, most likely to drop, less or most likely to fail, and less likely to earn a degree. And so it's hard for all of these categories to get a child successfully in college. You'd be surprised. The ones who are the most successful in college are usually have the largest disabilities, because we see those disabilities. So when we talk about deaf and blindness, we'll talk about college attainment for people who are deaf and blind. And there's some really interesting success stories in there. Again, it references chapter 5 and 6 about cultural issues. But again, prepping for college. So again, he's 15, he's in the 10th grade. They're already prepping for college, selecting college and staying in college. Here at both schools at SEC and SAC, there is a DSPS, or Disabled Students Program Services. That's kind of like our extension of the 504, the IEP. We don't really do IEPs, but we can help a student, an adult student, with different things that it might take them to be successful in class. Again, any accommodation and modification has to be on a letter, sent to the professor, and then we make sure that that is extended. Now, I've shared with you guys understood.org. I share this with all my classes. I just heard an audio commercial for them on the radio. It was beautiful. Going to college.org, and then helpforadhd.org is another one. It's really, really cool, because there's people who have been there and say, this is what helped me. Right. So now we talk about people and situations, and so first documented case in 1700s. I would say that, as our society changes and children are expected to be more modest and be more controlled, yeah, that's a problem. But so they had this old poem called "It's the Story of Fidgety Philip," and it just basically said that he couldn't sit still and he knocked over the table. Look at it. How Mama did fret and frown when she saw them tumbling down, and Papa made such a face. Philip is in sad disgrace. Listen, I had my 75-pound 7th grader. Yeah. No, 75-pound 7-year-old pull over an entire shopping cart at Trader Joe's, like a full cart, pull it over. I mean, he was tiny and he still pulled it over. So they used to think it was a brain disorder. They used to think that it had, they call it fidgety Philip, or obnoxious, or ants in the pants and things like that. But there's a lot of successful people with ADHD. Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Graham Bell, Orville and Wilbur Wright. We wouldn't have airplanes. We wouldn't have electricity. We wouldn't have everything Benjamin Franklin invented, like eyeglasses, contacts, false teeth, Thomas Edison, electricity, phone. Henry Ford, Bill Gates, hello, Microsoft, Paul Orfalea, he created Kinko's, Richard Branson, he now has a spaceship in space, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights, Mark Twain was, yeah, really interesting, Leo Tolstoy, wrote War and Peace, Robert Frost, one of my favorite writers of all time, Robin Williams. Oh, breaks my heart. He killed himself over his brain degenerative brain disease. That's what makes me sad. Will Smith, ADHD, Justin Timberlake, Will.i.am, the guy from Maroon 5 we said at the beginning here. Terry Bradshaw, a football player. Cami Renata Ferrara, I have no idea who that is. Michael Jordan, fantastic. Actually, Michael Jordan is the richest athlete of all times. He was very good with his money. And I don't know who Jason Kidd is. But again, all these different pieces. And then we talk about Michael Phelps, who also has Marfan syndrome, which is a genetic disorder, long face, big ears, caved in chest, super tall. Abraham Lincoln had it too. It's the opposite of like shorter people. This is the taller people. He also has really chronicled his issues with drug and alcohol. He had his suicidality. He's created a lot of support systems for people who are very successful, but also very depressed. It's pretty amazing. He's done a lot of really good work. He was like, people don't realize how suicidal I was for so long. It's like, it's heartbreaking. Even the movies, Percy Jackson and the Olympians talks about he has dyslexia. This is Rick Riordan who wrote that. He also wrote a bunch of other books, but Percy Jackson, the protagonist, he had dyslexia, but what for him, it wasn't dyslexia. He was able to read old like Greek lettering. It was kind of cute. So yeah, Rick Riordan, I listen. He has young adult stuff. I listen and watch young adult, all this stuff. Good stuff. Let's see, learning outcomes, future perspectives. We have technology that's going to be very helpful with everybody forever. This is again almost universal design for learning, because even if you don't have ADHD, you could still use an iPad and be very successful with this technology. Doing prevention, it's more like modifying the symptoms of it, right? And again, I think like all young people, there's this time in your 20s where you kind of like let your hair down and get a little silly, but life is what life is. But here's the thing, if things aren't going well, you got to fix those, right? Some of the risk associations are like lead. It talks about Flint, Michigan, the water crisis. Still to this day, it's been over 10 years. Nobody in Flint, Michigan can drink any normal water. Everything's bottled, and the National Guard brings in bottled water every single day because there's so much lead in the water, in the groundwater, in the soil. There's not one part of lead that is safe for you to be around. And so now we have children with intellectual disabilities. How do you be pregnant if you can't drink water unless it's out of a bottle? Then there's other toxins, right? So anything like when you have neurological conditions, like sometimes they're saying decreased blood flow and electrical activity in the frontal lobes of the brain. So if your executive functioning needs blood flow and oxygen and you're not getting it, how is it supposed to work well? Same thing when you and I are stressed, all of our blood flow goes into the inside of the brain, the animal parts of the brain, the things that make us walk and talk and breathe, right? But high levels of calculation out here in the brain, you're not getting blood flow to it or oxygen to it. How are you going to be able to calculate those things? Anatomical differences in various regions of the brain, meaning some parts of the brain are thicker, some are more curly, some are more dense, some are different colors, some are, right? No, I don't mean like rainbow, but like more pink or more blue. Differences in neurotransmitter level. These are these things like dopamine and serotonin that help take information from one part of the brain to the next. And so if there's less of those things or more of those things, those are differences in the brain, just actual structural or physical pieces. And so we talk a little bit more about what things like pesticides have done and how the brain is able to overcome some of these things. Like omega-6s might help. They're good for everybody. They're not horrible. But again, those could be good or bad, right? Hypoallergenic. I've done gluten-free, casein-free. I've done all kinds of stuff with him. There is no cure. It's just monitoring symptoms. Again, for me, when my house is a mess, I'm a little bit more unraveled. So if I just take time to get everything organized, I'm a lot more calm across the board. I know for him, I've seen research studies that said like a organized environment keeps an organized mind. And I was like, oh God, that's so me. And then more assistive technology, like it could be calendars. Again, he uses Google Classroom. He has reminders. He has all kinds of different things. So very, very cool. Again, check out understood.org. There's a lot of stuff. Oh, look at that Spanish flashcards. Trabajadora, worker, shuffle cards, delete cards. And so if you guys have never used, I just lost it. It used to be a Facebook game, and it is called, oh my gosh, it's like flashcards in there. And I forgot how they set it up for one of my classes. What's it called? I said it earlier and I forgot it. It's like flashcards, but you can also turn the flashcards into a game. So wait, what's it called? It'll come to me at the end.
Quizlet?
Say it again.
Quizlet?
Yes. Thank
Mhm.
you. I don't know
And
if I
there's
still,
also Nearpod. Nearpod's really
they're so good. I really love Quizlet. Let's see if I can find Quizlet.
and Nearpod is
Quizlet. I had it, I used it a long time ago for I don't know if it's gonna have me do it. Yeah, that's me. I wonder if it'll, oh yeah, let's try. I had it set up for 110, and it's cool because you can do, here we go. So these are all these different ones you want to do. So 110 is a College of Socialization. And you have to take the class with me. So you can do flashcards, click the card to flip, right? And it'll tell you the actual word. Demographics is a study of, you know, people and their different qualities, right? Oh wait, let's go back one. And then you click it once like that, right? But you can also do a little test. So it does true, false, multiple choice, essays, little matching, things like that. You can print it. So some of his teachers use this. It's kind of fun. There is one where there used to be like asteroids. You can battle against other people. Oh yeah, here's matching. So you start the game and it times you. This theory is this statements and a microsystem, actually economics, exosystem, culture, demographics. And so this tells me, took me 15 seconds and I can play again. And these are the people who played with me. So really kind of fun. So you can create it for your own class. Yeah, you can create your own library. You can do all kinds of stuff. It's totally free. For teachers, they want us to pay, but I'm like, oh, no thanks. And you can even see what's already up there. You can look up physiology, whatever, like words, look at eukaryotic cells and cell organelles, vocabulary roots. Isn't that cute? Isn't that funny? Yeah, this is one of his teachers, Mrs. Admire from last year. And so see, look at all these different things. Look at all these different possibilities. So again, the technology is amazing. There's so much cool stuff that we have out there. Again, you can use mnemonics, you can make a song, you can, there's even apps on my phone that you can do like make a rap song. And so I'm like, oh, get your history terms in there and see what it comes up with. And it's like Napoleon. And so we kind of joke around about it. To me, whatever it takes to get him to learn is good. He's smart. You just have to get him engaged. That's pretty, you'll hear that a lot of time. Oh, but these kids are so smart. Yes, if they're constantly managing all this different input, they're smart, sometimes smarter than you and me. It takes a lot of effort to focus on what it takes to focus on, right? So again, summary, we have the inattentive type, but then we have a mixed type that's inattentive plus impulsive and hyperactive. So we usually just use the term ADHD. You might hear it ADD, but again, under IDEA, it's under OHI category, which is still really, really wild. It's been around forever and technology is going to help us in the future. Pretty straightforward summary. Wow. Okay. So what do you guys think? Let's connect real quick. How many of you know somebody with ADHD? Already have somebody in their world or
my
whatnot?
nephew.
Yep.
He just got diagnosed with it.
How old is he?
He's 6.
Yep. Very, very normal. He's like around first grade.
And I think they're giving him the medication that you mentioned earlier. I think it's Adderall.
Yeah, Adderall and Ritalin are very, very similar. To you and me, it's like a cup of coffee. It just gets that brain kind of kicked, like just clicked into gear. And it takes, depending on how the size of the child, and it takes about, maybe 30 minutes to kick in, maybe 10.
And he said, well, my sister gives it to him at nighttime. That's what the doctor said too.
Oh,
And then-
he may be on Concerta. Concerta is an atypical stimulant, and Concerta is in your body all the time. So yeah, you can do it at night. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the next day, well, actually, the teacher has been like texting my sister and saying like he did really good today. He did all his work, and like they've been noticing like a lot of changes in his behavior. And yeah, so my sister's like, oh my gosh, it is working. I mean,
Mhm.
he keeps getting green cards now for behavior.
Which is lovely, right? Because like, and I've heard it both ways. I've heard kids say, I don't want to take meds. I hate that my mom gave me meds. When I was an adult, I stopped taking meds, and I've heard it opposite. My mom never wanted to medicate me, and I am so mad at her for not, because when I was an adult and I took it for the first time, my whole world just calmed down, and I could sit down and read a book and have a cup of coffee. I was like, so it's hard to make those choices sometimes. But it's good that you waited till 7, because 7, there's this little thing where the brain has these like growth arcs, and at 7, by 0 to 7, you have like a really solid foundation. And now 7 is a time that you can kind of get creative now. That was my personal philosophy. It's like, we know that the body and the brain has like these little growth spurts, and 7 is a good time to add in meds. It's a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, my sister, well, she's divorced, but her ex-husband, he didn't want my nephew to be taking medication. So she's like, but I'm the one that's with him all the time. Like, you don't have to put up with like everything that I'm going through. It's really difficult. And he was like, well, he's not like that with me. He's not like that with me. And it's like,
Probably because they're both the same, the dad and the boy.
uh-huh,
See,
probably.
yeah, and it's relative, right? I mean, if you have a very calm parent and a very hyper kid, I can tell you right now with my ex, same thing. It's like, he's like, I can't take him anywhere. I'm like, I can take him anywhere just fine.
Mhm.
You know, so like that tells me that I'm a little bit like, I'm more outgoing than my ex. He's more like, I can't stand it when he says hi to everybody. I'm like, that sounds like a you problem, right? Not a him problem. Right. So it's a thing of like, when parents line up with this stuff, it's nice, but sometimes when it's oil and water, it's hard. It's really, really hard. So yeah, so we all know somebody with it. I'm still friends with people from high school, elementary school, who ADHD, we call him ADHD AF, right? Like, but now he sells insurance, like life insurance, and he's doing very well, but he also puts out like videos every single day about life insurance. I'm like, oh my God, go for it, dude. And so there's a lot going on. And so just know, in your classroom, it's very common. It's very common in the gen ed classroom to have kids who are undiagnosed, but have a hard time just focusing. You will still have parents who you make a referral for and say, hey, let's get this kid assessed for maybe some supports with ADHD. And the parents are, I don't want my kid assessed. I don't want to go down their school record. And then the teacher's like,
I have that so much in preschool and in elementary.
yep.
So many situations where I would talk to my coordinator and I would tell her like, hey, you know what? I think this kid needs to be assessed. I think something's wrong with him. His behavior, he doesn't focus. And a lot of like, sometimes even the coordinators are like, oh, I don't know, it's because this.